Hi, Kara. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you are here. Would you like to give a little explanation and introduction about yourself to our community?
Of course. My name is Kara Hecht. I have been a TVI and O&M for about 6, 7 years, and I have been mainly working with the population of multiple impairments and visual impairments. And before I was a TVI O&M, I was an adapted PE teacher with the same population of students for about 8 years. And so I've been working with these students for a long time, and I feel like that's, where my groove is at. Aside of professional career stuff, I am married and have one 5-year-old daughter, and I feel like we're just getting into the fun, adventurous part of parenting. And she keeps me busy. But that pretty much sums up what's going on with me right now.
That is so exciting. So, for those of you guys who are listening to this podcast episode, or maybe you're on YouTube, we have tried recording this multiple times, and we keep just saying, just give me a student with a visual impairment and leave the technology somewhere else. This is our
That is
third
the
time.
truth.
So if it sounds like we've had part of this conversation already, we have.
We have.
We have multiple times over. But Kara, you keep saying things that I'm like, oh, I want to go back to because we just had this incredible conversation. And then the podcasting software that we were using decided it was no longer going to be recording us. We are on Zoom now, which is why we love Zoom. Because it's just so simple. So I love the fact that you were an adapted PE teacher. And in our last conversation, we were also talking about how I see people who are coaches in the physical realm as having this really incredible opportunity to hold space for people to step into the next version of themselves. Do you find that you have had to do that in both roles?
Yes, for sure. I feel like once I get a new student or once I go into a new team or a new school, that's kind of the area we always start at, because whether it's the student or the educators surrounding the student, and no shade on the educators, they're doing the best they can, with the group of kids they have and everything all the time, but they are kind of at a comfortable place. And a lot of times I have to come in with and be like, hey, what do you want to do? What do you like to do? What's something we can change? Like, if you had the choice to do any of this stuff, what is it? And it kind of just opens up a part of that student and a part of that team that's like, oh, okay, let's see what they want to do, and let's, throw everything we can at it trying to get them there. And then once we get the ball rolling, usually that student takes over and I don't have to be the hype man anymore. The student takes over that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And a lot of times when we go into classrooms, when they're having rec leisure time, our students are just sitting off to the side and not really
Yes.
exploring their own rec leisure. And you had mentioned in the last conversation how you had a student when you guys were walking around the
Mhm.
perimeter at the PE class, and how that learner was looking at a different object. And you gave them the right and the ability to say, hey, I want that. And then you were able to like skyrocket that skill. Will you walk us through what that looked like for you guys?
Of course, of course. So a lot of times with O&M specifically, I feel like O&M and TVI can mesh and cross categories a lot when it comes to, like, when you're implementing something, you have to have all the hats on, I feel like. But I feel like during PE, this particular student was being pushed around in a wheelchair when all of the other students were, walking at their own capacity, whether it was in a gait trainer or walking around the perimeter of the gym for the warm up. And this was a routine that they did every time in PE. And I was with them in PE a couple times, and I was just, like, I'm like, we can do better than this because I'm pushing you, and you have no say in this. And so, when they're up and walking next to their friends, and they can go faster or slower and catch up with somebody else, or, play tag with some of their friends during that time. And we're really taking that away from that student unless we try to find a way for them to be able to have that social time during the walking of PE. And so we opened up the idea of, getting them in their gait trainer during that time. And I, as an O&M, I was teaching them the route around and how we can follow the black line. There's a thick black line around the perimeter of the gym. And once we got that accomplished, and that was his norm going in, getting in the gait trainer, participating in PE that way, he loved it. But then pretty soon after that, I saw his sights set on somebody riding an adapted bike. And so it quickly snowballed into him showing us something else that he wanted to do once he realized that we knew he could and that we would problem solve with him and that we would find a way to make it happen. And I remember seeing him really like tracking this other student on an adapted bike across the gym, and he was just, honed in on it, watching it. And I was like, do you want to ride the bike? And this just huge smile came across his face. And of course everybody's like eye rolling, like, how are we going to do this? But with PT and with a lot of collaboration with all the team members, we found a way, and he loved riding the bike. But that all came from just, upholding that core belief that, yeah, we'll find a way for you to participate. You don't have to be pushed around. Let's find a way to participate that you enjoy. We'll make it work.
What's interesting about that is that you saw it as an opportunity and the rest of the team saw it as an obstacle. And you were able to convince them to try it anyway. What did those conversations look like? Because ultimately what it ended up doing was it opened up this kid's world to give him agency over his own life. But in our lives, in our day-to-day, we can sometimes be like, oh my gosh, that's going to be so hard. I'm going to have to work a lot harder. I already have all these things on my plate. Or other teachers we had talked about may not see the same vision for the student. So how did you go about those conversations?
Well, first of all, I'm not a confrontational person. So I'm never going to go into somebody's room and be like, you're doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. Let's change this. That's not my MO. Normally I will, if I see a problem, I will try to lead by example and just be goofy and fun. And a lot of times the staff will see that that kid is having fun, and then they want a part of it because they don't want to, trudge through a boring day where nothing's happening. They want that fun too. And I think sometimes when you're in a classroom all day, every day, you just get stuck in a rut. And sometimes it just takes somebody bringing that fun. Also, I feel like sometimes they can be like, oh, we got to get A, B, and C done. And although that's fine, that's wonderful, big picture for these students is that could be life-changing. Slowing down and figuring out how to get him on a bike or in a gait trainer and interacting with a group for PE, that is life-changing. Because think of how many opportunities you might be opening the door for those families to go participate in the community, whereas before they didn't think it was possible. And so it's kind of me getting excited about it and me having fun with the student. And I think that me modeling that, it's just hard for other people not to follow suit and be like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that kid being happy and that kid loving it. And then I usually always know that I get buy-in when they're like, hey, last week you weren't here during PE and we tried this. And I'm like, yes, they're on the same page. But it's usually always just through contagious enthusiasm, I feel like.
That's funny. There's that saying, you gain more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yes.
And I think about that often when I'm talking to other people and wanting to collaborate with them, because I had a team before and I worked at a school where there were lots of O&Ms, right? And you could see the different personalities and how they went about getting people to do what they want them to do. And I really had no skill in that because I'm also not confrontational. So I'd be like, well, if you want to, you can try. I mean, it wasn't vinegar. It also wasn't honey. It was just like, it was not effective at all. Okay. And then I learned, it's so weird, Kara. I learned how to sell because I was starting a business, an online business, teaching yoga to moms, right? And I started to learn how to have conversations and I started to study it. And only then was I able to advocate for my learners. I was just like, oh, well, at that time, whatever I was selling was not selling, but I used it in my work. It was so cool to see the way that I came across and how I presented things made a stark contrast because I knew I didn't want to be the vinegar woman. I didn't want to be like, you have to do this, you have to do that, because I saw what happened behind those people's backs. Nothing. They got maybe in front of you, people are doing what you want them to do, but not when you're not there.
Yes.
And I also knew that what I had to do changed. So I love the fact that you have a completely different way of doing it and being like, no, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to be impactful in this learner's life. And I know you're going to catch on because that is what we do. We see other teachers and we're like, okay, Yes, I want to do that. I want in. What was one of the biggest challenges that you had in getting other people on board with some of your ideas?
I think there's a lot of people who are just set in the day to day, a lot of educators who are just set in the day to day of this is the routine, this is what we follow, because they have so much on their plate. And it's never through ill intentions. It's just there's so much on their plate and they're so exhausted. And so bringing that life and happiness, and sometimes it takes letting them have the win, and as far as if a student is getting really close to communicating something or meeting a goal that we've worked on forever, I might take that step back and let that one who's not been so excited about it kind of step in when I know that breakthrough is about to happen, and then they get to feel it, and then we might go to the administrator and be like, hey, show them what they did, and it's with the team instead of me, so then they catch that fire. There's always going to be that one or two that just don't want to, but then they're the ones that stick out when the rest of the team is having fun. And so you just gotta, I hate to say this, but fake it around them. And I don't think I've ever had anybody not come around eventually. Might take a while, but I'm going to show them the same respect as the students. This might not be their cup of tea. They might be really good at art and data and all that kind of stuff that's not me, but I can pull them in when their strengths are a part of what I'm doing. And so finding what they're good at, what lights them up, and bringing them into our processes when it's something that they feel comfortable with is also a big help when you hit that roadblock.
Oh, that's so smart. So I think oftentimes we go in saying, okay, I'm the expert and I know that this learner needs to be doing XYZ and I need you on board right now. Where you are more like, I'm the expert and I know the learner needs to be doing XYZ. And so I'm going to start the process and I'm going to even like role release some of this happiness to you. And when you are on board, then I'm going to give you a little bit of that excitement too. And then the domino effect of bringing not just you and the learner, but you and the other staff and the learner to the admin to say, hey, look, so that it's not just like you did this thing with the learner, but the whole team is on board too. That is like mind blown, like whoosh, what
There's
a
very little that we can do on our own popping in here and there for sessions. And I think I learned that a long time ago in that PE position, because I would see them for a snippet of time. And if I wanted it to really make an impact, it had to go beyond me and involve, parents, families, classroom members, administration, all of that, because I cannot do it all. And I don't want that pressure on myself because there's a lot of things I'm not good at. And I want to be able to finally step back and be like, hey, this is not my thing. Will you please help me with this part? But it took a little bit to get over that hump of like, I'm not good at that. Because I want to be good at it all. I want to be able to do it all. But that's just not how the magic works sometimes.
so true. So when you're sitting down, say it's like a planning period or just thinking about work and you want to make a change and you know that a learner would benefit from something and you think that or you know that the other people around you aren't going to go for it, what is one of the first things that you do?
I think the way I initially approach it is I go into a classroom and I say, here is my end goal. Here is what I'm wanting. Where is there a time during your day where it's just not working with that kiddo? Like you have a routine or you have, after lunch, we talked about choice time, or during morning calendar time, like my student just doesn't have a good routine to be able to participate effectively. Let's see if I can apply what I'm going for into that time and not only help me hit my goal, but help you get this student to participate more independently during that part of your routine that's already there. The calendar time is usually one that always pops up. One that usually pops up too is like putting away their like backpack, finding their seat, putting their notebook on the teacher's desk, kind of just like the regular routines of the room. And I feel like I can jump into that a lot of times and help it, because if I can help that kid get more independent, it's taking more off of that teacher and para. And so I like to go in and say, what's your classroom routine? Where are your biggest hiccups? Let me see if I can plug in my goals and that student's goals into that time period and help you.
Yeah.
And that usually is a good place to start because that's something that they can take off their shoulders.
Right. Win-win.
Yes, usually, almost always. And if I'm coming in with that mentality, I very rarely get met with one of those classrooms that like doesn't want me there.
Yeah. And I love that about that. You're going to be talking much more about this in the TVI symposium, and I absolutely cannot wait to learn from you because when we were chatting over DMs, I kind of had to like push you a little bit to submit your application because this is your first presentation.
You definitely did have to push me. It's not my comfort zone, but on the Facebook forums or when we're chatting with other professionals in this field, it comes up all the time. I have a roadblock with this kid who has multiple disabilities. I don't know what to do with this team who is really hard to work with, with a student who has multiple impairments. I can't get anywhere. They don't respond at all. What can we do? And it's all really well-intentioned people really wanting help. And I always want to go in and I always like write a book on those comments and then I'll delete almost all of it and be like, no, I'm not an expert in this. I shouldn't be telling them. But anytime I stop and I do have a conversation with that person, they're always like, thank you. I have not even like thought of that. And it's such a simple thing, but you just have to shift the way you go about things a little bit when collaborating with the teams or working with the student. And it's easy to do once, that switch flips. So I hope that I can have good information for some people and not just stuff they've heard time and time again. But I am definitely putting myself out there because it's not a comfort thing, but I love what I do and I want other people to love it too.
I think one of the things that I really like about you and getting to know you just a little bit is how humble you are because you are an expert in this. You came to me with like 3 different ideas that were all phenomenal. And then we just kind of like narrowed it down and I was like, oh, what
Yeah.
about this over here? Because I could see what the other applications were and I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
there to be too much crossover. And I also
Yeah.
couldn't tell you exactly what I knew. But I think one thing that I've learned from you, even just in this podcast episode, is that it's not like a me versus you thing. It's really a we situation. And when you can really approach it like that, and one thing that is coming up for me and when you talk is you think about people as they have the best intentions.
You have to. You have to think that they have the best of intentions. I mean, we've all had our bad days. I've had bad days. I've had rough years and I wasn't bringing my best self. But if somebody would have judged me on that, it would have been really tough. And luckily, I've had, some really great people in my corner that have, seen the good and seen my best days and they judge me on that more. And so I want to do the same for others, if nothing else, to get them out of those low times, but to let them know they, just like these kids we work with, they are very worthy. They have strengths in areas that a lot of other people don't. And we all have to figure out what our strengths are and use that collaboratively, for lack of a better word, to get the job done because no one person with any kids that have visual impairments or multiple impairments has all the answers. And if you say you do, you're lying. And we need others. And if we have that like me versus you mentality, it's never going to work for that student. We're never going to be able to come together and find the solutions. And the student's going to be the one that pays. So I'm not up for that.
Yeah. And you always keep the student centered, and it's student centered with a holistic approach with everybody. And I think that coming from also, forgive me if I'm wrong, tell me, the adapted PE, is that also
Uh-huh.
itinerant?
No, I went between several schools, but I was hired on by the school district for that. And I
Okay.
went between 2 or 3 buildings, 2 or 3 different schools, serving the same students that I'm serving now with vision and O&M
Oh,
capacity. So,
that's fun. Okay. When I say itinerant, whether you're working contract like you and I are, or W-2, going between schools
mm-hmm,
is itinerant. So basically, I'm getting
mm-hmm,
at the fact that you weren't a classroom teacher. You come from another aspect of the team that's also in there just for a short amount of time and then you have to
yes,
leave in for a short amount of time and then you have to leave, and you're also not working one-on-one with the teacher at that time. You're working one-on-one with
correct.
the PE teacher who's also kind of sometimes like a side member of the
Yeah,
team. Like maybe they show up for an IEP, maybe they don't, it'll be fine.
yes.
Yeah, so you were probably even more of like an aside kind of, and having to figure out how to get the respect and the reputation and the trust of other people. And to me, I don't know you very well, but I very much so trust you. I trust in your word and what you say. You come across very trustworthy in that respect, and I think that that might also have something to do with it too.
I hope so. I hope that comes across because that's what I want to lead with, whether I'm working with students or educators. I want them to know I'm in their corner, I'm there for them. I'm not going behind their back to the administrator and telling them, all this crazy stuff that happened in class. All the classrooms are crazy. All the classrooms have their things. But I do think what helped is since I was hired on by the school district, a lot of times if there was a shortage in a room or something like that, like I would sub in that classroom. And so I got to be in that classroom for a whole day, or for 2 days while a teacher was out. And I got to feel that load of the teacher and the parents that are in that room of being in there all day, every day. And although it's fun and you love the kids, it does get taxing because you're on all the time. You don't get to send them back afterwards, and you don't get that short break in between your next class. And it really helped me see the perspective that sometimes they're coming from, and when they don't want to try a new idea, or when they're just exhausted, or when they've had 5 IEP meetings back to back. And so I think that gave me perspective. And I think I've talked about this with several other therapists. When you kind of have that outside looking in point of view, like when you pop into a classroom and you can see what's going on, you pop into another classroom and can see what's going on, I feel like you can get big picture of what's working, what's not working a lot of times. And without having to be rude about it or something, you can be like, hey, go talk to Megan next door. She has some really good ideas for calendar time that are working with student A and student B. Go see what she's doing. Maybe she has some ideas because I'm all out or whatever. And make those connections between some of the classrooms and some of the teachers. Once you can take away that me versus you thing that happens, it's so much nicer to have a group of people that are in your corner that you can collaborate with. But if you have a weird idea, they'll try it and they'll be like, sorry, that didn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah.
And it's not a judgment thing. And you feel a lot more open to collaborate and work together on stuff.
That's lovely. I also hear that you're both allowed to fail and not be perfect.
That was a hard one. I'm always working on that because failure is hard for me when something doesn't work. I think it has helped that I'm okay. Like, do you have an idea? Let's try it. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, let's laugh it off and let's try something else. And I think that has come in really handy with some of my students, because if they don't get it the first time, it's like you can almost see that like glaze over. I'm just going to look away. I'm kind of frustrated. And I have to kind of be that one to be like, hey, we tried. We just haven't found the right way yet. Let's try again tomorrow. We'll try this. And I think it's kind of rubbed off on me having to be that person for some of my students that hit those roadblocks often.
Yeah. I mean, so do I. And so does like our entire team. And I say this over and over and over again. Like, if I have to be the one that you watch fail, so that way you don't make those same mistakes, or so that way you just feel like a normal human, I will be that person. And the fact that you're able to take that into your teaching as well, that in my teaching is where I get a little bit more uptight, because that I feel like I should be the expert in. Building a business, I don't feel like I need to be an expert in. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, you guys.
Yeah.
And nobody else does either, so it's fine.
Yeah.
But in there, I'm like, oh, I should have this figured out. And it's nice. So, I mean, we could take that pressure off of ourselves and off of the other people that we're working with. So I do want to, I love this conversation, and you and I have been chatting for an hour now, even though
it doesn't feel like it.
It doesn't. I feel like I could just like sit down and talk with you for so long, but I do want to honor everybody's time. And so we'll start to wrap up. And I want to ask you one last question. And that is, if you could give our community a piece of advice to help them be better O&M specialists, or TVIs, to help them take a step forward, what would you tell them?
I would say dream big with your students, and always assume that they can do it. Always assume that they know what you're talking about. Always assume that they're listening to everything you say and fully understand it. Because with some of our students with multiple impairments, I feel like it's easy to think, oh, that's all they can do, or oh, they can't, hold that spoon while they're eating. And I have found that I am the only one limiting it if I am thinking like that. So dream big. Don't say anything is off the table. It's okay to say we haven't found it yet, but set high expectations, and that staff surrounding you and those students will rise to it.
Oh, love that. So many amazing nuggets. Thank you, Kara, so much for being on this podcast episode and for believing in yourself enough to present to us at the symposium, because I know that what we're going to gain from you is going to be so much and so exciting. It's really, like, honestly, Kara, it's people like you that we want to uplift our platform for, because you have boots on the ground. You're not just in this because you've been presenting for 10 years or like you want to push a specific way of doing things or a specific resource or something like that. You are joining the conversation. And that in and of itself is so valuable. So if you can just remember that all you're doing is joining the conversation. Like you don't have to be the expert, you don't have to be the know it all, right? And all of your answers and all of your ideas don't have to work for every single person, but you will help one person. And at least I know that's me, and I might be a little selfish,
Good.
but I will at least get better at my learners with multiple impairments. And somebody else will too. And that I think is really profound work that you're doing. So thank you for putting yourself out there.
You are more than welcome. That's all that matters to me, is that somebody else, gets the fire fueled in them to work with these students and to believe in them and see how far they go. That's all that matters to me.
Yeah. And you're doing it. All right,
Yay.
friend.